All right, here we go. OverDrive off and running. TSN 1050 on the TSN app, your home smart speaker up on TSN 4. Bryan Hayes, Dave Feschuk of the Toronto Star. Training camps open league-wide in the NFL. Very rarely do we start with training camp news. And honestly, Dave, 30 seconds ago, I wasn't planning on starting here. But the Grappler just got in the ear of both of us and said, check out Twitter, what's going on with Joe Burrow. And something's up with Burrow. I guess he went down and the cart is coming out to pick him up.
Yeah, it's the kind of golf cart you don't want to be in this time of year.
No, this is the something's happened. You can't walk off. We got to be really certain you're okay. And you're going to drive right to the MRI, like directly to an MRI. You can see it up on TSN 4. Again, we don't have information on exactly what happened. There are reporters down there watching practice, and this is early days into camp. They just reported this week.
Yeah.
And Joe Burrow's been all over SportsCenter on ESPN, all over the media down in the States, and I guess up here by extension, talking about his contract because everyone knows he's up next.
Oh, yeah. After
Herbert got paid and Lamar got paid and Jalen Hurts got paid this summer.
That's right.
Everyone knows what's coming. It's going to be Joe Burrow. He's going to get a massive contract. And Joe Cool was saying, it's all good. We'll figure it out. I know who I am. It'll work itself out. And this will not affect his contract because he's still going to be Joe Burrow. Whatever happened here, and I don't want to put the cart before the horse, pun intended, in terms of what actually is going on. But this is the most terrifying scene in football.
You're really
a starting quarterback, a superstar quarterback going down in camp.
Apparently grabbing his calf is the report.
Okay.
From one of the beat reporters down there that, and medical staff was looking at him. But you're right. You don't want to put the cart before the horse, but you do not want to see your quarterback horse in a cart.
Right. And obviously he's got the red jersey on. No one's going to hit him.
No.
So it was either he was running and something happened, he tripped. I don't know. We'll see if we can find out more. But there's so much buzz around Burrow and the Bengals and the contract and the amount of quarterbacks that have the potential to be great in the AFC. And he's at the top of that list right behind Mahomes.
Oh, yeah.
I think the greatness of Mahomes is you look at the AFC and how deep their quarterback situation is.
Right.
And how much deeper it even got this offseason. And there's a clear-cut unanimous number one. Nobody's debating it. Absolutely, Mahomes is number one. But I think last year, Burrow, in my opinion, solidified his role at number two.
Ahead of Josh Allen.
I have him ahead of Josh Allen. And then I think it's Allen, Herbert, probably Rodgers now, maybe Trevor Lawrence, a number of guys that are fighting for that 3, 4, 5 spot. But it's the worst possible scenario. You see a quarterback go down at any point in camp. Yeah, and it may have a huge effect on the season. It may not. Who knows? But not good for Joe Burrow and the Bengals.
You got to hope it's just a little
you got to hope it's nothing. It's a cramp or something. Yeah, it's all good.
But then anytime you see a guy grabbing that area, you're thinking the worst case, of course, Achilles, some sort of a foot injury, some sort of a torn calf, because torn calves can take a long time to come back from.
Yep.
But yeah, who knows?
Who knows?
But
we'll
it's amazing. It's amazing how NFL training camps are generally like the sleepiest kind of thing going, right? The only thing that can happen in training camp is this.
It's a big injury.
It becomes a huge headline.
And there are injuries every single year to big players. I was thinking about it today, and it's kind of a morbid thought. And even in the moment, I caught myself. Like there was an element of self-awareness that it's almost sick and dark where you're like, who's the one that's going to go down? And it's going to happen. Usually it's not quarterbacks. Hopefully it's not going to be quarterbacks, because they're so protected and they're so necessary and they play such a prominent role in the way the whole season is going to play out for every single team. But every single training camp, there's a lineman that goes down for the season. There's a linebacker that goes down, a cornerback, a wideout, a running back that blows out his knee. It just happens every single year.
It's the saddest
And you don't know who it's going to be.
And then, of course, in the NHL, they're out for the season before training camp.
Yes.
and on LTIR.
Right. Exactly.
You don't even need to tweak a calf. You're just out.
No, you're just gone.
Matt Murray, I can't play.
So is there any investigation there? Like, what do you make of the Matt Murray stuff? Like, how do you, as a reporter, I'm sure you're making calls and stuff, but what are you going to say? Like, he's been medically cleared, I guess, to go on long-term IR, if that makes sense.
Yeah. The way it's been explained to me is essentially, as long as the player buys in, as long as the player isn't contradicting the team on its desire to put you on LTIR, you essentially can make the case you're injured at any time, right? You can it's almost impossible for a doctor to refute the fact on any number of levels. Like if you say I've got concussion symptoms. Am I going to tell you don't have concussion symptoms? Am I going to tell you can play with those concussion symptoms? So that's just one of the things you could say. And we don't know whether he's truly injured. Like he was backing up against Florida. He declared himself healthy at the end of the season and said he was ready to go for 2022, 2023, or 2023, 2024. Those things were said, which makes you wonder, well, what the heck happened since then?
Who knows?
We don't know.
Who knows?
The thing about it is the NHL is just essentially throwing up its hands, right? Like you don't hear about investigations of these things.
No, and I think in large part that's the league with an element of self-awareness that their cap system is so restrictive.
Right.
And they're never going to budge on that. Mm-hmm. So they're essentially saying, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead. If the player wants to retire without officially signing the papers because that player wants to get all their money, then this is the only way around it.
Right.
Because that's what's been happening for a long, long time.
Of course.
Right? Where there's just players where they have an abundance of injuries or very serious injuries, and they're not going to retire and give up the money. They want the money. They can't be bought out. The teams don't want to buy them up because that's a punitive number that's going to go on their cap. So it's like, fine, we won't look.
Right.
We won't ask questions. Right? Like Jake Muzzin, we understand, just isn't going to play again. Now, he's had serious injuries.
Yeah, I think he's at the point where
absolutely, but I think
more could be devastating.
Sure, Carey Price, Shea Weber, the same thing. Like with Weber, it was just an abundance of injuries that got to the point where I think he was like, I can't do this anymore. Could he pass a physical if he had to? I wouldn't be surprised if he could.
Yeah,
but that's just one of those. When he signed that 15-year deal, he was never going to finish it.
No,
and now he's done, and that's it.
Yeah,
and he's not going to retire because there's still real cash to be had, but if you're going to have a hard salary cap and a strict salary cap, it's not fair to the team to have to chew on the number if the guy's not going to play.
And this conversation,
it's a wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Yeah, it's a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Like you talk to agents about it, and the agents are like, "Well, look, and GMs too are like, if we start complaining to the league about this guy, then they'll start complaining about this guy." And
right?
It's like nobody wants to complain about anybody else's LTIR guy because. It's almost impossible to prove the guy's not injured, right? Like try to prove somebody is not injured. Now, if they say they got a torn ACL and then a doctor examines them and says, no, it's actually not torn,
right?
That's one thing, but no one's dumb enough to do that, right? They're gonna put themselves down for injuries that are essentially impossible to refute.
Yeah,
that's essentially what you got.
Exactly, and like with the buyout situation, you don't get the full dollar amount,
right?
If you get bought out, you get it at a certain percentage. So that's where I think the understanding is a two-way street here.
Why would I argue?
Exactly. Like the Leafs, I would assume, had made it clear to Matt Murray they're going to buy him out.
Right.
If he's healthy. And then Murray may have suggested, I'm not. And then there was probably an understanding, well, okay, if you want all your money and you want to stick around, you got to go on long-term IR and you're not coming off.
Yeah.
And I think Matt Murray said, absolutely. I'll take the $8 million cash I'm going to get this year, and I'm not going to play.
Yeah.
And that's where they're at.
That's where they're at, and that's the shame of the NHL salary cap.
It just complicates things that are so unnecessary.
It complicates things that are so unnecessary, and it just, we're talking about it earlier in the week when Jaylen Brown got that big deal in the NBA, right? NBA players get paid. Nobody begrudges them the money. They just get the going rate, right? You're a max player, super max player. Here's your going rate. And in the NHL, because of this restrictive salary cap, where teams are looking for loopholes at all times. Whether it's LTIR or buyouts or whatever it is, you got to feel guilty if you're a star about taking money. I heard you yesterday talking about how there's Aho taking the 8 years, doing a team-friendly thing by taking the maximum term.
Yeah.
The Leaf guys who haven't done that would argue, hey, it's a capitalist system. Like, I'm trying to do what's best for me, as well as, do what's best for the team on the ice. But, you're made to feel bad for being financially astute in the NHL.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's a shame. It really is.
It is, and it's put all of that pressure on the players and alleviated all the pressure off the owners.
Yeah.
Because the owners can just put their hands up and say, there's nothing we can do.
That's right.
There's only so much we can spend. Sorry, guys, we would have spent way more, but Gary forced us to accept the salary cap. And yet, in a team sport, especially a deeper roster where you need depth, it's not only consistent in the NHL where the top players do have to set a standard, because we are seeing that in the NFL, where, like, Patrick Mahomes is a great example. Mahomes is the 8th highest paid quarterback in the NFL.
If he started with that, when he signed that deal, he was the highest.
He was. Yeah. It was a long-term deal, though, that was understood pretty quickly that other guys were going to blow past it.
Yeah.
And any contract in the NFL, it's not worth the paper it's printed on. He could walk in there today and say, I want to rip this up and I want $350 million guaranteed. He'd get it tomorrow.
Yeah.
But he's not going to do that. Aaron Rodgers, who I think is taking on I think Rodgers, what he's doing here is he's playing the PR game. And everything's rosy in New York. He's showing up at OTAs. He's going to the Garden. He's watching the Knicks, the Rangers. He's going and catching Taylor Swift. He's doing everything to be Joe Good Guy in New York.
Mr. New York.
Including, I'm going to give back $35 million guaranteed. That's a massive amount of money.
A lot of money.
He's giving that back to the team. Credit to him, but again, I think it's a PR play. I think that's as much about possibly giving it to Dalvin Cook, who I guess is in New York now, trying to make sure the rest of the team stays intact, make sure they chase rings. I think there's a part of it that plays into that for sure from Rodgers' standpoint. But I also think he's smart enough and savvy enough to understand I'm not in Wisconsin anymore. I'm in New York, and I'm going to throw these guys a bone to make it look like I'm Mr. Charity here.
Yeah.
And I think he's playing PR 101 because I'll guarantee you they're eating it up in New York.
Wow.
I can't believe he's doing that. Like, Jets fans are probably absolutely loving this guy, but if he throws 4 picks in week 1 and they lose, they will eventually turn on him. He's still got to win.
I think you're dead on, and I think it's a brilliant move by Rodgers.
Yeah.
And you're right. It's not going to matter if they don't win. It's not going to matter if he doesn't perform. It's not going to matter if he's not a MVP caliber quarterback and kind of turns back the clock on last year's disappointing results. But I'll tell you what, like, there's a lesson to be learned there, because guess what? That PR stuff's going to work if you are also successful. And you don't think it'd be a great PR move for Austin Matthews to do very similar?
Absolutely.
For Austin Matthews to say, okay, I'm going to take McDavid got 12.5, McKinnon took 12.6. I'll take 12.7.
Yeah.
That would be like, give the guy the captaincy.
Yes.
Give the guy the captaincy. He gets it. It would be the one moment where you said, we know he can score goals. We know he's talented. He can win a Hart Trophy. We know he is one of the best players on the planet. But until that moment, we didn't know he actually got it. We didn't know he actually understood what it means to be a Toronto Maple Leaf. And now we know he understands what it means to be a leader on the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yes.
That's what it would be.
It would absolutely symbolize all of that. It would encapsulate all of that. Yeah. I think it would go so far for him and possibly set a standard for the rest of the players. Mm-hmm. I'm not bracing for that to
happen.
He's
not doing that.
It doesn't sound like it's going to happen. No, it doesn't sound like it's going to happen. But you're absolutely right. And, I've been beating that drum for a long time.
Yeah.
And I would urge people not to lose. Like, don't weep for Austin if he did that. He'd still be making $12.7 million.
And here's the thing.
And the amount of endorsement money he makes is absurd.
Well, here's the thing. Like, if you want to look a little bigger picture,
yes,
beyond the nickels and dimes and the tax implications and what your take-home pay is going to be on that $12.7 million this year in the here and now and for the next number of years that you sign, look big picture.
Yes.
Toward legacy in Toronto and what that can be worth in nickels and dimes and millions and millions.
Yes. Because if you apply that, you go down that road, then the years actually become irrelevant for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Like, even if it's a 3-year extension, that won't get talked about nearly as much as, man, he only took 12.7. Took 12.7 because he knew he had to go a tick above McKinnon because he was up, but he didn't get greedy and didn't get crazy. And on top of that, if you go out and continue to perform and chase MVPs and have playoff success, you're talking godlike status. I wasn't surprised the first time around, although his his contract was incredibly quiet and happened basically in the darkness of the night.
Surprise, yeah.
Just out of nowhere, he signed a 5-year, $11.6 million deal. It wasn't noisy like Willie. It wasn't noisy like Marner. But he grew up in Arizona. It was still early into his tenure in Toronto. I've said this for years, and we're beating a dead horse here. But the guy that grew up here was the guy I expected to understand that.
Yeah.
And yet Marner was the one that I think was hurt the most and taken aback by the reaction the most, which is equally as puzzling considering you are from here. Because my understanding is that summer he was going through the negotiation. He had a really hard time. Like a really tough time, and he really paid for it. And yes, you got your extra $400,000 a year, maybe $800,000-900,000 a year, maybe $1.5 million. But if you just signed the deal on July 1st and said, "I'm taking it, give me $10 million over 6," and I'm not going to get crazy, you would have been paraded in the street as a hero, and you still would have been overpaid. Based on your comparables around the league. That's what's amazing to me is that it was so short-sighted and it was so within a sphere of like 6 feet. Well, that guy in that stall's getting that. That's all I care about.
That's what it was.
It never was a macro step back. Guys, what if we look at the whole thing? Do you know how much people are going to love the fact that the guy from Toronto said, I'm going to do this or do that? And hey, guess what, guys? You're still making more than Kucherov, Point, Rantanen,
you know what?
Aho.
You're 100% right.
It would have been PR 101. It would have been a masterclass.
I'll tell you what.
And they absolutely let it go up in smoke.
You could not be more correct. And the interesting thing to me is that what these guys that have been at the core of this team have not seemed to realize or just don't seem to care about, maybe. That's probably the more likely scenario. But is that there is a job opening in that locker room, and it is for the heart and soul of the team, for the hearts and minds of Leaf fans. People know the stats, they know production, but when you think about the connection between Wendell Clark and the fan base, and Dougie Gilmour and the fan base, and go on down the list of heart and soul guys and their connection to this fan base, none of those guys have got that right now, I don't think.
No, and I think in some ways it's because of the style of play, which is like Wendell's the epitome of a blue collar. This is a white collar team that's a white collar town that's always loved blue collar players.
Yes,
and Clark personified that. Gilmour to a lesser extent, but no teeth, and he's out there stirring
still
it
a
up.
finesse guy that got 120 something points.
Absolutely, and listen, played tough. Like no one suggested Dougie didn't play with a heart and soul type of. He absolutely did.
But the game has changed. The game has changed. There's different ways you can communicate that. Right?
Yes.
Different ways. It's like Brendan Shanahan tells us the game has changed. That's why they haven't had Brendan Shanahan type players on this roster, because there aren't any out there. Right. Maybe the Matthew Tkachuks of the world are the rare exceptions. But I think one of the ways you can exhibit your
heart and soul is through the cap.
It's through that.
Yeah.
It's through what Aaron Rodgers just did.
Yeah.
And saying, hey, I get it. Okay. I'm rich already. I want this team to be soaking in riches. I want the guy next to me to be a better quality player because I gave you a bit of my riches for everybody else to enjoy. And that's what these guys are missing. And I think I actually believe, I've talked to some people that believe this, that know a lot more about money than I do, that in the long run, it would be a financially astute decision to do.
Oh, without question.
Because it would come back to you.
Yes.
I know you'd lose something in the here and now, and agents hate that.
Right. Like a finite number, a tangible number that would be lost.
That was on the table, and now it's not on the table, and that was yours, and now you gave it away. And that's the way agents tend to think, I think. And fairly. That's
understandably.
Like,
they're there to represent, and they want a percentage.
They get paid on a percentage of that number.
Yep,
I get that. I totally get that. But here's, if I'm your big picture agent of your career, not just of your paycheck today, I'm saying to you, think about the big picture here. Think about what you can mean to this city if you do things right and luck breaks your way and you guys actually win something. If you were the guy that set that trend, if you were the guy that said, I'm giving back.
It's a good point about what could be in front of them this year, where with Matthews, using him as the example, because he's the best player, the face of the organization. His cap hit is already written in stone this season.
Yeah.
yet, you could argue if he did what we're discussing right now, if he accepted a $12.7 million cap hit over 3 years, 5 years, 8 years like McKinnon, whatever it happened to be. Again, that number would have no actual effect on the cap system this year. This team is already built effectively. But if they went out and won this year, that would be considered like the beginning of the culture change.
Change the tone.
Right. Which, again, it would have absolutely no effect on this upcoming season's actual finances.
Yeah.
And the budgeting in terms of building a team out. But the way sports is talked about, the narratives that come alive and narratives that get driven home, it would symbolize that in many ways.
It would.
And I think that's what Aaron Rodgers is understanding here too, is Rodgers is like, it's out there. I gave back $35 million guaranteed because I want to be a New York Jet for a couple of years, and I want Dalvin Cook with me, and I want to make sure everyone's happy. And will it actually have an effect on if they win a Super Bowl this year? I'm not sure. But if they do, he becomes the king of New York.
Yeah.
He's the guy that changed the fumbling, bumbling idiot Jets, and it all started with his philanthropy.
Basically.
Effectively, his charity within the room saying, this is what I'm going to do and the standard I'm going to set. And I'm going to be a guy that's fully committed to everything here, including winning, both physically, mentally, emotionally, and financially.
Yeah.
And if it pays off, it just can pay off in spades.
Wouldn't that be something?
Like it can? It's a fork. It's a fork in the road.
It is.
And you can take it one way, and it can be incredibly lucrative for you. The other way, you may look back and say, you know what, I ended up giving away this, and it didn't pay off because we didn't win anyway, or I got hurt. That's part of the gamble.
Still rich,
but you're still going to be worth a lot of money.
Still going to be worth a lot of money, and I still like. I think we've both been around the sports business long enough to think that there's not a little something in it for Aaron. Like
I'm cynical enough to understand that. I absolutely believe that this is a portion of it, and possibly a higher percentage than you think.
Yeah,
is about playing a PR game in New York.
Yeah,
is about I'm the new guy, and I'm trying to get people on my side quick, including the fans, and I want everyone to understand I'm doing something that I didn't have to do this, but I'm giving back.
And that's my thing with the Leaf guys. Like there's a certain exhaustion with these guys in this town that I sense. I could be wrong. There's still super fans that love them no matter what they do, who will wear their jerseys no matter how it goes. And that's great. But I think there's a lot of people in this town are like, man, it's 7 years, guys. We're going into year 8 of the Matthews Marner era, and what do we got to show for it? Like,
yeah, they're not the happy-go-lucky kids anymore.
Right. Now a happy-go-lucky fan base that says, aren't we lucky to have these young guys?
Yeah.
It's not like the potential is limitless. Like we've seen, like the majority of the potential is out the window, man. Like the bulk of their prime is gone probably, unless you get really lucky.
Yeah.
Like if you look at the stats, like most guys perform their best in their early to
mid-20s.
Yeah, and guess what? They're
in their mid-20s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're getting out of those.
That's exactly where they're at.
But I think this could be a reset moment for these guys.
I totally agree with you, Dave.
Nylander ain't doing it.
Nylander's not going to do it, but he may do it in a way if Matthews were to go first.
That would be interesting to see.
Like if Matthews were to go first, and then Willie all of a sudden quickly accepts a deal that in his mind is giving back. I don't know if collectively everyone would see it that way. And again, I'm not asking for any of these guys to take something ridiculous. Nobody is.
Look, they can do whatever they want.
Expected to. It's their right. It's their lives. It's their career. What we're detailing here is, and I think most people would accept this and agree with it, and I think they probably would in the back of their minds, whether they want to go down that road or not, is that there can be a great benefit to it.
Yeah.
And there can be a real, spin to it and possible change of the culture in that room that might be necessary anyway.
And I'll tell you what, on the flip side of that, Hayes, there can be a benefit to being perceived as the selfless one.
Yes.
The team-friendly one, the hometown discount guy. There's a huge benefit to that.
Oh, people eat that up.
But there's also, I think we've witnessed it. And you pointed out the guy that I would point to. There's a detriment to getting your max. Like there's a detriment to grinding the team for every last dollar. And I think Mitch Marner lived through it.
Yeah, well, that's it. Exactly.
There's a certain level of misery that comes with knowing everyone in town resents the fact you got paid.
Yes.
And
that's
you may not care.
To do.
And I know there's unrepentant capitalists that would say, up yours. I'm taking it, and I deserve it, and I'm getting it, and I don't feel 1 ounce guilty about it. And I understand that's the system we live in.
Well,
but guess what? It ain't capitalism in the room.
No, and there's another party involved here that needs to be included in this, and that's management.
Yeah.
And them actually playing a role in this.
Wow.
And a part of the role of management is to try to they're the ones that can be the mouthpiece for all this.
Oh, yeah.
It's not going to be fans and media.
No.
That's going to fall on deaf ears. The only one that can really sell any of these guys on any of this is probably Brendan Shanahan. Mm-hmm. Brad Treliving can try, but they don't know him enough.
That's true.
Right? And like it's not that they wouldn't trust him. And it's not that they wouldn't like him or believe in his plan, but I think even like Brad Treliving hasn't been through the ringer here.
Mm-hmm.
He can't speak to what it's been like for 7 years. And he's not from here.
No.
You know, like Shanahan is from here. He knows what it's about. He knows what they're chasing. He's been a part of the ride the whole time. And it's on management to negotiate appropriately as well. Like, that's another thing.
They haven't been very good at that.
No, I mean, that's really.
And that's Dubas.
The brunt of it.
The great negotiator, Kyle Dubas, who negotiated himself out of a job in Toronto.
Right. He caused a lot of problems.
For a lot of this.
Yes, he caused a lot of the issues that remain left over. And now it is on Treliving to try to reset the model. And that's ultimately what it comes down to. Is if you're not playing, like we always talk about how difficult it is for Canadian teams to win and the tax system and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
But if you're cutting off your own nose to spite your face, like if you were setting the marketplace differently in on your own team,
essentially what they did.
Exactly. And just say, well, we just have to accept it that we're different. Then you're screwed.
Yeah.
Like if the other 31 teams, or at least the other 24 in the States, 25 in the States, are playing by a completely different set of negotiating
Certainly
rules.
Tampa has been.
Yeah. And obviously, evidently, Carolina,
Boston,
Boston,
the way nobody
Colorado.
Nobody wanted to make more than Bergeron. Or Marchand didn't. I know Pasternak ended up taking more, but that was probably okayed by Bergeron.
Probably an understanding when it kicks in, it wouldn't be there anyway.
That's the other thing. But there's something to that, right? And I think that speaks to too, like, I think Dean Lombardi used to be the general manager of the LA Kings when they won those 2 cups, used to call it, there's dressing room chemistry and then there's financial chemistry. And I think he was the first guy I've ever heard say that. And there's a lot of truth to that because everybody on that roster, or at least the guys at the high end of the roster, have to buy into the financial chemistry thing. Or else if one guy doesn't and takes the
house
money,
of cards,
it ruins the whole thing.
Yeah,
right?
it can.
So you got to have, but maybe like the horse is out of the barn for the Leafs in a lot of ways because they already decided they wanted to maximize
well, they're
their value.
starting at a number that is difficult to start at. It's like a qualifying offer.
This could be for Matthews. There's an opportunity for a reset here, where he resets his intentions in this market and says, "Look, it's not just about the money, guys. I could get more, but I want less to help us."
Right. We'll see.
I'm not holding my breath.
No, I'm not holding my breath. I've not, much like I wasn't holding my breath that Shohei Ohtani would be a Blue Jay, but now he officially will not be. I was holding my breath he'd pitch in Toronto, but as we found out yesterday, that's not the case. He's already pitched today. He pitched a gem, 9-inning shutout. One hitter in Detroit. That Detroit offense is pathetic, but still.
Even Alek Manoah got through that team.
But Ohtani pitches incredibly well. They pick up Lucas Giolito and a bullpen arm last night. They paid a steep price based on the prospects that they gave up, the second and third ranked prospects for 2 rentals. And they're still 3.5 out of a wild card, but they've got the second game of a doubleheader today against Detroit. If the Angels beat Detroit, they come in here 3 back of the Jays.
3 back.
So you talk about a big series. This is going to be a big series. So we'll get into that and more. Dave Feschuk of the Stars in here. OverDrive continues, brought to you by FanDuel, bringing you everything from the opening line to the final score. I'm Bryan Hayes. OverDrive continues, TSN 1050 and on TSN 4. All right, so we mentioned the Joe Burrow situation. He was carted off today, and Zach Taylor, the head coach of the Bengals, reporting it's a calf strain, which sounds like a win.
Yeah.
A calf strain means he probably shuts it down for 2 weeks. Maybe doesn't play in the preseason. I mean, we're still in July. Who knows?
Here it is.
But Yeah, and I guess he had calf issues. That must have been absolutely terrifying when he stopped and started hobbling around and got down on the floor. Zach Taylor might have honestly passed out.
Oh, can you imagine?
Oh, it's terrifying. I mean that's your meal ticket. Everything you are is Joe Burrow.
Every time I see a guy hopping around like that, and if you're listening on radio, he's got the sleeve on the right calf, which is the calf that is strained. So he obviously had it
He had something going on anyway. I think that's he's saying there was some soreness there before.
But I was just, I think you see a guy hopping around on that lower leg like that, and it just reminds me of that Kevin Durant injury, right? Like it's just the way he hopped around and then fell down.
Yeah.
In Toronto in the championship run, that's one of the worst things. Like I know people cheered and all the rest of it, but everybody, nobody was happy to see that. Like, I mean, they knew Toronto was going to win the championship or had a much better chance of winning the championship when he was down. But that is just one of those injuries. You just shake your head. Like,
no,
you wouldn't wish that on anybody.
Terrifying for pro athletes. Yeah. It is. And quarterbacks in particular, you can probably come back from an injury to any other player on the roster, like any of the other 52 players. You can't if it's your quarterback.
No.
Like if your quarterback's done for the year, it's over. And that's how quickly it can turn, where the Bengals are one of the 4 or 5 Super Bowl favorites.
Yeah.
And as they should be. And if Burrow goes down and misses an extended period of time or were to miss the year, you'd be talking about them possibly winning 5 games. 6, 7 games.
It's true, man.
I mean, that's how integral a superstar quarterback is, especially in that conference. Like when you consider how good that conference is and how many elite quarterbacks, like it's going to be a great study in 20, 30 years, how many Hall of Fame quarterbacks are in the AFC for the 2023 season.
Yeah. Because
Mahomes is going there. If Burrow continues at this rate, he's going. If Allen continues at this rate, he's going.
Oh, yeah.
Rodgers is a first ballot guy. Russell Wilson, I don't know if he's going to the Hall of Fame. He was on pace before he got to Denver.
Yeah.
If he performs like he did last year, this year, then that might take him out of the Hall of Fame contention.
Lamar.
Lamar's probably on pace. I mean,
He's been an MVP. I mean,
exactly. And I wouldn't be shocked if Herbert and Lawrence put themselves in that position at some point in their careers.
And then Deshaun Watson is the guy with incredible talent.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's wild. Like
it's crazy.
It's so necessary to have a superstar quarterback. If you don't have a superstar quarterback in the AFC, what do you think you're accomplishing? What do you possibly think you're going to get out of this season?
I mean, you could probably say that about you can't win without a superstar anymore, can you? I mean, who was the last team to do it? I guess it was. Is it? Do you have to go all the way back to the Ravens? I don't know.
Yeah, like Joe Flacco, but Flacco was like that playoff run. He was unbelievable. You go back and look at his completion rate; it was, I believe, unprecedented.
Yeah,
like legitimately the greatest statistical run in NFL history. What he was doing. So, in terms of the big picture, Joe Flacco's not going to the Hall of Fame. There was always that funny debate: is he elite or not?
That was the debate.
Yeah, Grappler saying Matt Stafford with the Rams, but Stafford when he's healthy is pretty damn good. Is he a top 5 guy? No. But you could make the argument on any given Sunday that's a top 10 quarterback or can be, has the ability to be that. Joe Burrow, we'll see. Speaking of Russell Wilson, this story in USA Today with Sean Payton is wild. Wild. So Sean Payton was speaking with Jarrett Bell of USA Today. And when speaking of the coaching job of Nathaniel Hackett last year, who was one and done, he didn't even get through the full season. He got fired, I think, after week 15.
Yeah.
Payton said on the record, quote, "It might have been one of the worst coaching jobs in the history of the NFL. That's how bad it was," end quote. That's insane to say that.
You never hear that.
I can't, this speaks to a couple of different things for me. One, the arrogance of Sean Payton.
Oh, yeah.
Which has got to be absolutely out of this world, ego and arrogance.
That's Babcock style arrogance.
That's exactly what that's like the kind of thing
Babcock ego.
Babcock would say. Whoever was here before, brutal.
Although
awful,
Babcock
terrible.
Would never say it that way.
I don't think he would
right?
either. I don't
do it in a more underhanded kind of hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I'm the greatest, and the guy before me was terrible. But he would. But this is this is a coaching fraternity,
right?
Where they never turn on each other in this type of fashion.
No, and Hackett has been Hackett's been around NFL circles for a long time, and he's the offensive coordinator in New York now. He's still working with the Jets. He's in their conference.
League.
He's still in the league, and it's just an absurd comment to make. And he went on to say that there's a number of different people in the building that also have some dirt on their hands. I don't believe he mentioned the owner though,
right?
And which I think explains a couple of different things. One, the reason the owner has brought in Sean Payton and paid him all this money is very clear. You have to make our investment in Russell Wilson work.
Yes.
And what Payton is doing here is protecting his prized possession and his number one priority, and that's Russell Wilson, from any possible heat from a year ago.
Yeah.
Now, the outside world understands what he's doing. You'd be silly not to. Right. Russell Wilson was horrible last year.
Brutal.
Was it a mess around him? Yes. But does he have a massive ego that got out of control where he had his own people kicking around the facility and all that? Yes. Was that Hackett's fault to an extent? Sure. But Russ probably should have known better. But this is Payton simply letting the world know he's going to protect his owner and he's going to protect his quarterback. And he'll take down anybody he has to do that.
You know what? And given the conversation or the way the conversation started about how if you don't have an elite quarterback, you're nothing, there's some logic to it.
Yes.
Like if you don't build this guy up, if you don't build Russell Wilson up and give him the platform to be whatever he can be, and there's a lot of suspicion he can no longer be the Russ that was a Super Bowl contending quarterback in Seattle. But like outside, like all the other stuff, like the stuff about Nathaniel Hackett doing one of the worst coaching jobs in the history of the NFL, like obviously they must hate each other, him and Nathaniel Hackett.
There's got to be a history.
There's got to be a history there.
There's got to
be some sort of a feud there because nobody says that about a guy they don't know or a guy they don't have a grudge against. But everything else about just there were 20 dirty hands around Russell Wilson, like that is basically, you're right. That is just wiping the slate clean for Russell Wilson.
Yeah, that's all it is.
None of it was my fault last year. I'm still great. Watch this.
Yes. And Payton, I think to be fair, I think this is the time to protect your quarterback.
Oh, yeah.
During the offseason, you do whatever you have to prop that guy up.
Build him up.
Now, once you get into the season, if it goes south, then I think Payton's got enough cachet behind him. He'll let him know. And obviously, he's setting a new standard when it comes to what Russ is allowed to do around the room. And I think Payton's probably aware that a lot of the players on that team have to learn to trust Russell Wilson again, too. Because I'm sure a lot of them were like, who the hell is this guy? Like, you got paid your money. You got your ring. You came in here thinking you're the king, and he didn't pull his weight last year.
Not even close.
But for Payton to do this on the record, he immediately said, I'd be disappointed if we didn't make the playoffs. Again, in a really deep AFC. And then immediately went after Hackett and basically put a shield up on Wilson and said the 2022 season, that wasn't your fault. That's not your fault. It doesn't matter how you played, what the statistics say. I think they went, they go 5-12. Doesn't matter. I'm here now. It's all good. Hackett was a hack. And we're going to move on with our lives.
Hey, man, in terms of just...
What a quote. Might have been one of the worst coaching jobs in the history of the NFL.
Hey, man, in terms of commanding the attention of the sports world,
Payton knows how to do it.
At a slow news time, you got to give Sean Payton some credit here.
Yep.
And, he puts himself under some pressure, but guess what? He also puts Russell Wilson under a bit of pressure. He's saying, look, I'm giving you...
You got a hall pass last year.
Yeah, I'm giving you the pass. I'm taking the heat for you. Like, I'm not taking the heat. I'm going to direct the heat elsewhere for you. I'm going to point out to the world that this place was a bleep show.
Yep.
And maybe it was. I mean, it sounds like it probably was.
Listen,
it sounds like Hackett was qualified for the job.
He was a terrible coach.
He was a terrible coach. We all, you just needed to watch the games. And everybody said, look, that's a great example of why coordinators are not always head coaches and vice versa. There's some genius to this. As much as I'm shocked by it, and as much as I'm sure there are members of the coaching fraternity saying, we don't do that to our own, Sean, I think there's some. He's no idiot. He's been around a long time.
No, he's been around a long time. He's trying to set a new standard. We talk about culture all the time. Expect the playoffs. Forget the past, and let's get cooking here. Follow me, because I will lead you out of the circus.
You might as well swing big, right?
Might as well. He's getting paid to do it. And again, I think that's clearly what the owner has hired him for.
Yeah.
You got to save me because last year was a mess. And there's new ownership down there, and they've invested massively in Russell Wilson. And you better make sure that asset pays off. That's your only priority.
Well, because you got
and this is the start.
Because if you don't have a quarterback, you've got nothing.
You got nothing. Yep, you got nothing. Jay's off today. They're back in action, back home tomorrow with the Angels in town. Lucas Giolito is going to start tomorrow night.
Yeah.
For the Angels. I guess he flew right up here to Toronto. He's in town. He's waiting for them. The Angels are playing this afternoon. Second part of a doubleheader against the Tigers. They won earlier today. But Shohei Ohtani pitching earlier this morning or earlier this afternoon. You will see him pitch again for the Angels. Not going to be flipped. The Angels are going all in. What do we make of it?
Unless
and how does this affect the Jays? Unless they possibly change their mind between now and Tuesday, which is always a possibility. But what do the Jays feel about this, and how might it affect what's going to happen in the AL East and the AL wild card? We'll get to that more next. All right, so we talked a lot about Shohei Ohtani being on the block, Dave. And I got to be honest, I'm furious. I really hate the Angels. I really, really despise the Angels.
Really?
Because they never win anything. I don't expect them to win anything this year.
Yeah.
And I wanted desperately to see a Shohei Ohtani trade happen just so I could live through that and experience what that might look like.
Yeah.
Right? The ultimate unicorn being traded.
Oh.
How many prospects are involved? How many major leaguers are involved? What kind of back and forth? What kind of market would that look like? Like, just my curiosity alone got to a point where I needed to see where he was going to go, who would be willing to pony up the price, and what the price would look like, and then how he would react in a different spot. And then the Angels come around and they ruin everything by deciding, not only are we going to keep Ohtani, we're going to go all in here and we're going to try to make the playoffs.
Yeah.
How dare they do that?
How dare they do that?
How dare they do that?
And how dare they pitch Shohei Ohtani today in Detroit instead of tomorrow in Toronto?
Gutless.
The secondary ticket market sellers are very dismayed.
Well, I'll tell you what, I would suggest some of the sellers are ecstatic that they sold those tickets earlier in the week when people were saying, oh, he's pitching Friday, I got to get them.
Got to sell it now.
But if you didn't sell them in time, now you've lost your opportunity.
It's basically tanked. I've been watching that market quite closely.
Yeah.
And they were like the lowest price ticket I saw on a couple of the resellers before it became apparent he was not going to pitch in Toronto on Friday. Was like, you were looking at about $200 all in.
Yeah.
It's less than half that now.
Yeah. And it probably should be.
Yeah.
That's probably what it should be. It's still going to be a Friday night game in Toronto.
Be in the lineup.
He'll be in the
theoretically.
lineup. Yeah. You would think you're coming off a doubleheader. They might give him a day off.
Imagine they give him a day off.
That would be the ultimate just crushing of the soul scenario.
God. You pay the big dollars to go to the ballpark to see Ohtani, and Ohtani does not play.
Not only does he not pitch, he doesn't even pick up a bat.
Wow.
And it's a blowout, so he doesn't even pinch hit late in the game.
That'd be bad. Let's hope that does not happen to people in Toronto.
Yeah, I hope the Angels are more sensible than that. But
well, it's not the NBA. They're not about load management.
No, well, now they got to win games.
That's what I mean.
Right? And now like you, listen, and I'm being tongue-in-cheek here, obviously, but I don't think this is a sound decision personally. I don't think the Angels have enough to make the playoffs.
Not even close.
But it's just, they're not 10 games out.
No.
They are above 500. They're 3.5 out of a wild card spot right now. I think they're 6.5 back of Texas within the division. The division appears to be, likely out of sight, out of mind for them, because not only do they have to jump Texas, they'd have to jump Houston. I don't see them doing that.
They're not going to do
They're not going to do that, let's be honest. But could they catch that third wild card spot? It is feasible that they could, and this will be a shot in the arm. And it's basically an all-in gamble, not only to make the playoffs, but to beg Ohtani to stick around.
Yeah.
Right? There's symbolism here from ownership because they got involved, saying, let's prove to this guy that we're legitimate, we want to win, we're going to do everything to make him happy. So he wants to be in L.A. I think he'd probably like to stay with the Angels. I haven't heard otherwise.
No.
I think what most people conclude is the reason he might want to leave is because they stink every year.
Yeah. He said it himself. He said it at the All-Star break. I'm getting tired of losing.
Yeah, he wants to win. Yeah. But I think if he could win anywhere, he'd love to stay in L.A. and win in L.A.
I think so. He chose L.A. first. He chose the place. It wasn't like he didn't have a choice.
No, he could go anywhere he wanted to.
To the L.A. Angels.
Yeah. And this is a message to him that we're going for it.
Yeah.
And from that standpoint, I can understand it. And if they make a push, if they get in and then they land them, it was one of the great gambles that paid off. And Major League Baseball history.
Mm-hmm.
But if you just gave up your second and third ranked prospects and you miss and he walks, it's one of the worst decisions in Major League Baseball history.
You're right.
That's the fork in the road right now.
That's
which
the thing.
I kind of appreciate.
It is one of the great conundrums that any franchise has been faced with in this era, because on one hand, you understand the urge from the owner, Artie Moreno, here, because a la the curse of the Bambino, which haunted the Boston Red Sox for a century plus, or close to a century, after they, famously sold Babe Ruth to the Yankees. You don't want to be known as the guy that gave away Shohei Ohtani, that traded Shohei Ohtani when you had him on your roster. On the other hand, do you want to be known as the guy that went all in trying to placate Shohei Ohtani and then lost him for nothing in free agency a few months later?
Right. And a couple of big prospects.
Which is worse?
Whew. I think it's the latter.
Yeah.
Like, I think ultimately, if Ohtani has already concluded he's gone and you don't have that information.
You don't know that.
You don't know that yet. But maybe you should have tried to find that out.
Well, I'm sure they're trying.
I'm sure they're trying, but they're not getting
hard.
the answers they're looking for.
He's
Although this might suggest that they got an answer. We'll stick around if you prove you're willing to win.
Maybe.
And this is the first step. That very well could be the case. Steve Phillips on this and more into the next hour. Role play level of concern at 5:30. OverDrive continues. TSN 1050 and on TSN 4.